very exciting report. We're looking forward to hearing the findings and, of course, using those findings to inform our judgments. That's why reports are being done. On that note, I'm going to call on Emmanuel Ali to give us a brief intro as to why we're here.
Thank you very much, Deputy Minister, Honorable Minister, Dr. Sanya, representative from the United Nations Unicef lead, Montrose Rep, Madam Victoria, and distinguished guests here today. We are grateful that you're here to witness the launching of these studies that was conducted by the technical group Montrose sometime in June, July. This was the studies that focused on kids in grades 2 and grades 4, and the objective was to determine, assess the competence level of these kids in literacy and numeracy. About 260 schools were surveyed for a total of 4,729 students, and the participants were equally represented by gender, so equal number of boys and equal number of girls. And we're here today to launch the studies, and this will serve as a baseline. And I must conclude by stating that these studies was informed by the 2018-2020 education sector plan, which aligned with the aims and objectives of understanding the root causes of either successes or failures, and the understanding was to go back to the foundations and see how these kids are doing in these fundamental skills. So without further ado, I thank you all for being here, and we will proceed with the program.
Thank you very much, Marwan. On that note, we're going to call on Montrose to give us a presentation of the highlights of the findings.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Victoria Brown, and I'm here as a representative from Montrose, the organization that carried out the study. I'm sure many of you have had time to engage with the document and the report. So today our goal is to focus on some of the high-level findings, to facilitate conversation on next steps and to learn how the government has been progressing since this time, and try to highlight some key areas of potential focus for the road ahead. So without further ado, actually, let me try to stand so I can see what I'm doing. Great. So as our colleagues had said, the focus of the assessment was to understand what key competencies children have gained in literacy and numeracy that are affecting their acquiring of foundational skills in the early grades. The goal is to support achievement of key priorities for the government and to look at ways to improve training of teachers at a pre- and in-service level in order to meet the learning needs of the students. So we'll focus first on findings around learners, and I'll look first at literacy. One of the things we tried to understand is how are learners clustering together in groups as they're progressing through their acquiring of key foundational skills. And a way to think about that is putting learners together into categories. And those categories have to do with understanding their ability to read at various levels. So we look in particular at what children are doing in letter sounds, in familiar word reading, and then in passage reading and comprehension, knowing that the ultimate goal of reading is to acquire comprehension that allows you to interpret text and apply that forward. We wanted to understand also the differences in progression between grade 2 and grade 4, because we expect learners to be growing over year on year and to achieve different targets in their competency levels. What we learned is that learners are progressing as readers from grade 2 to grade 4. We saw demonstrable change between those grade levels. What we see in the graphs on the right side are two measures of reading: oral reading fluency and then comprehension or understanding of those texts. And what we find is that the majority of readers, while they are progressing, are still reading at low levels. They're either non-readers, meaning they were not able to perform on the assessment, or they're in a pre-reading or emerging reading level, meaning that they're just starting to acquire these key skills. What we know for sure is that while learners were able to increasingly identify words and to read texts with fluency, their understanding of those concepts was more limited. The progression for learners around our reading competencies really did level off at a lower level for the emergent reader category. And what this means is that they're starting to acquire some very common words in the language, but they're not able to read those texts with fluency and take away meaning from what they are reading. Though they do identify individual vocabulary words, and they are starting to recognize those same words in text. This is a very important skill to acquire when learning to read, because vocabulary knowledge is critical to being able to interpret a range of texts. What we see, however, is that the majority of readers are still in a very developmental stage. And the dark blue part of the graphs demonstrate the skills of the grade 2 learners. The light blue demonstrates the skills of grade 4. And the reason we put them together is so you can see how, in particular, the learners are growing year on year. And what we see is that there is a big change as we move between the two grades. And we have more readers reading more often and understanding more of what they're reading as they go through. However, the goal and focus here is to continue to reduce the number of non-readers in the group, to eliminate those that are not able to read anything, and to move them along in groups as they try to grow the proportion of readers who are understanding more of what they read more of the time. A capable reader is going to be reading at a proficiency level within that grade. And so this is where we want to see the majority of the learners performing as we look to improve the inputs on the system in teaching and ultimately in learning. Here we have a look at the findings around numeracy, which is the secondary test that the students took. And what we see here is that the learners are also progressing between grade 2 and grade 4, which is very positive. It means growth is occurring in the classrooms. And what we see, though, however, is that the skills of the learners are very much in more of the emergent stages. Understanding the basic principles of numbers, understanding simpler, direct concepts in math, but their conceptual understanding, the application of those skills to higher level mathematical problems, is where we start to see a drop-off. And what we see here is that the majority of learners are having difficulties at higher levels. They're doing quite well all the way up to number identification and addition, but one of the more complex components of mathematics has to do with being able to subtract and being able to apply that to other skills such as word problems and higher level math, meaning 2-digit number application. And so while we see their procedural math tasks are quite strong, which is very positive, the goal is to be able to grow their understanding of those concepts so they can apply them to the higher level math problems. What we see as well is that their experiences in math have a lot more to do right now with memorization of key facts, which is where we all start from. Going forward, however, developmental strategies to allow them to apply those facts to answer problems or do more complex equations needs to still be a continued area of focus. This must be explicitly taught. Mastering these concepts is not something that comes naturally to people, but we do know that learners use mathematics much more commonly in their daily lives. And we did see a higher performance on mathematical tasks, which is very positive and in keeping with what we find in other assessments around the continent. These foundational concepts eventually will affect heavily on performance. And once you graduate from the early grades, doing those higher level math tasks is directly predicted based on how well they do with the simpler ones. So the goal here is to move them beyond their experiential math, their practical math, and into more conceptual application of those findings in order to use those strategies in the world around them to do higher level mathematical problems. Now let's take a look at teachers. As we know, teachers are the biggest factor in student learning. They have the biggest impact on what students are able to do and how well they're able to progress in school over time. And one of the things we wanted to look at very heavily is what are the skills of teachers coming into the classroom? What are they acquiring while they're there? And are they able to grow in their own capabilities as they instruct? And what we learned as we looked very heavily at positive actions of teachers in the classroom and their application of key facts is that teachers that were actually certified, they had gone through a training program and they hold some sort of certificate recognized by the government, demonstrated more positive actions in the classroom. This is a great thing to see. It means that training matters and training works. And what you come out of your foundational training as a teacher with matters for your ability to grow as a teacher in the classroom. And we see that those actions have more impact actually on teaching literacy if a teacher had a certification, rather than teaching numeracy. And some of these concepts are interesting to think about when we focus with teacher training, because just like learners, teachers acquiring of numeracy concepts comes more naturally. We use that every day in our lives, and it's one of the first skills all of us acquire as a learner. And we didn't see as much of an impact on those positive actions on certification when it came to numeracy. So this is something to consider as we look to improving training programs for teachers, either pre or in service. But they also are going to need additional support in growing more conceptual levels of numeracy so that they're able to transfer those skills to the students in their classroom. What we also see is that no matter what their background was coming into a teaching profession, the length of time they spent in the classroom has more of a limited impact actually in how well they're able to do in transferring concepts to those learners. So while we know that in-service training is critical, it builds your skills, it allows you to acquire new learning, and lets you grow in your concepts over time as our own research is applied to fixing things in the classroom. Your movement of teachers from their capabilities one level to the next will be a bit more limited once they're already in the field. Now, it doesn't mean that they don't progress over that time. It just means that the very foundation that teachers get themselves in acquiring knowledge on the profession is pivotal before they get assigned to a classroom and begin their journey as a teacher. So the early years for teachers matter too, just like it does for students. And the foundations they get in their pre-service training are critical to making them progress more rapidly and become more competent as professionals. What we want to think about here is how we can manage our teacher workforce in order to ensure that the right teachers are going into the profession, in order to ensure they're acquiring the right skills when they need that pre-service training, and to make sure they're mentored and supported once they get assigned into the classroom so that they continue to apply what they've learned and grow that over time. It is critical to have touch points for teachers throughout their career. Science changes. Our knowledge of what works is always evolving, and teachers have to move with that. But what they get in their early years in the profession matters more than what they get once they're out there. And this is something to think about as we apply inputs into the system and look at where to invest our resources bringing. The reality, however, is that you have a huge supply of teachers already out there. And what we saw from our findings is that they're showing up to work, that they're there consistently, and that they care. This is a critical thing and something that needs to be grown. When you have a workforce already at play, you need to build from there, as well as think about what the next generation will do differently and how they will reinforce what's happening already in the classroom. And what we know for sure is that in order to have a consistent supply of teachers, you need to have enough of that to meet demand. So as you look to engaging with your teacher workforce, understanding the demand out there, where teachers need to be, what types of teachers you need, what types of language communities they come from in order to approach learners at their early years. This is important for distribution. It's important for assignment. And as teachers move throughout their careers, the repositioning of that workforce workforce wherever the need is greatest. And this is ever evolving. But a teacher workforce management strategy is a key component of how the government will move that through in policy and then guiding how it will happen in practice. One thing we also looked at is trying to understand what teachers believe children should be able to do. This is key because as we work from a policy level top down, we want to understand what are our goals of instruction, what targets should children be able to meet. And in order for those things to be actualized in the classroom, teachers need to have an understanding of what their children should be able to do at various ages and various grades. What we want to see is that the alignment of the goals of the government, the policy level change, the competencies, are matched by what teachers believe children should do at each level. And one thing we found as we queried teachers about the skills students should have as they move grade to grade is that they have fairly low expectations of early performance in school. What we see is that most teachers believe that basic skills such as reading a short passage, understanding something read to them, being able to ask and answer questions, or even know the letters of the alphabet in terms of literacy, are often not expected of children until they reach about grade 3. Now, we may say that this indicates that teachers are not able to understand what those early years are about. But rather, I would ask us to consider the role of teachers in their lived experience and in their classrooms, what they see happening every day. The skills their children enter school with, their readiness to learn, has a huge impact on how quickly they progress. And we found in the study that only 1 in, I believe, 3 or perhaps 4 children had actually attended an early childhood development program. This foundational component of getting children ready for school, we know from research is key. But when it's not available, or when it's going to be a developmental goal of the government to implement such, we need to think about how we meet learners where they are, when they enter our classrooms as they are. And as you see here, what teachers are really telling us is that they're spending that first year really getting the children ready for learning. They're building basic concepts and things like discrimination and things like identification of shapes and numbers and letters alone. And so they're needing to spend that extra time in grade 1 when we would hope that they are starting on the literacy journey to get some of those key skills in place in order to make that successful. And in teachers' experience, most of their learners are not able to demonstrate these basic skills that we would hope to see in grades 1 and 2 until grades 3. What we also see, however, is that numeracy skills are expected to develop quite early. And as you see from our learner scores on the previous slides, this is in keeping with what learners are doing. They are acquiring numeracy faster and earlier, which is very positive. And a lot of teachers believe these key concepts should happen within grade 2. So this, of course, is still a little developmentally delayed from the grade 1 skills we like to see and basic numerical concepts. However, the foundational skills that children come in with in terms of numeracy are very much acquired in their home life. And they're more readily able to apply that in what they're doing in the classroom. So these skills are seen by a lot of teachers at a younger age, and they're building off of them as they get a bit older. The higher level concepts, multiplication, division, that are often starting to be taught around grade 2 and grade 3, are also being acquired at the appropriate time for the majority of teachers. And so this is positive. They are starting to apply some of those conceptual math skills to higher level thinking. And this is something to base growth on going forward. What's important is to try to align the goals of the government with the realities of the classroom. And understanding more about teachers' lived experience is central to this. Also helping teachers understand how children acquire skills, how they learn, and how growth happens is going to be key to getting those competencies in place at a younger age and to helping them understand how children progress developmentally over time. It's also important to understand what this means for instruction, curriculum, and how to align those goals that we have with the reality on the ground and allow our curriculum to facilitate that process of learning. In this thinking, we want to ensure that teachers are teaching to the level of children, that the skills that they are focused on children learning and acquiring are based on what they know as they go in the classroom, and that they grow proportionally as they're taught throughout the year. And sometimes this means thinking about performance, not from the ideals of where we want it to be, but from the realities of where we're beginning, and setting targets that are strong and are achievable at the same time. So we also wanted to look at schools. The environment where children learn is critical to facilitating their learning journey over time and making sure that the right resources and the right inputs are on the ground in order to facilitate the best learning process possible. What we saw is that high enrollment numbers in the early grades begin to diminish over time. And what we see is that there's a possibility of a couple of reasons for this. It could be that we're seeing higher dropout rates in the later years of primary school. We also could be seeing a lot of repetition in those early grades. This could be due to frequent absenteeism, or it could be due to the inability for children to demonstrate key competencies that allow them to be moved to the next grade. Higher enrollment in the early years is also a limiting factor for a lot of students. Large classroom sizes mean less individualized attention. That means less time a teacher can spend understanding the capacities of their students and really adopting their teaching to their need. This is something that is common in a lot of early grade classrooms. And in order to really understand whether or not this is a dropout rate or repetition, needs to be improved with further cohort studies. This is something we found by looking at attendance and enrollment data across the schools, and the trend was clear. So something is going on as children are entering primary school and attempting to progress. That needs to be a key factor in decision making around how we improve the environment where children learn. We also could see that there may be a high level of mismatch between learners' ages and their grades. A lot of the learners were overaged for the grades they were in. Whether that's because there's a delayed start to school, or because, as we said before, there might be high repetition rates, the reality is learners seem to be starting later and finishing later. What this means is that by the time you get to later primary years, you might find more teenagers in the classroom than lower age students. This is key when we're thinking about transition and completion, because as learners grow older, their ability to engage in a lower level classroom environment reduces. And there could be other cultural, social, environmental influences that therefore pull them out of school and place a burden on their completion. This is something we want to know more about, and conducting a more detailed analysis of when learners are entering, at what age they begin, at what age they progress in the system, and what age they complete will be really critical to getting the analysis right, so we can target interventions that have to do with mobilizing learners in and getting them there at the right time and helping them finish also at the right time. One of the things to consider as well is that we have learners entering the system that we want to absorb appropriately, but we also have learners already in the system that need the same inputs in order to succeed. As we see higher dropout rates in the later grades, we need to consider the role of alternative education programming in capturing those learners and pulling them into an education model that speaks to their need and to their reality on the ground. This is something that needs to have a reflection against the systems already present in the country on alternative education, and ensuring there's fluidity between the formal and non-formal models in the country, so that the skills children need are being acquired no matter where they are within the system. And this is particularly important as we think about how to improve formal education, because those two pieces must move in tandem to meet the needs of learners that are already there and to get them where they need to be. What we also see too is that the assignment of teachers is something that we need to consider as well, and this falls back to our workforce management strategies. What we saw is that there is an assignment on average of one teacher per grade across the primary schools. And we say that's excellent because there is a distribution of teachers. There's not a gap, so to speak, in having a teacher in every classroom. But when we have high levels of enrollment in the early grades, sometimes one teacher per class is not enough. And as we think about how we capture learners and keep them there and ensure they're gaining the skills, smaller class sizes with more direct contact between a teacher and their learners is critical. So the early years often need more than one class in a high enrollment school, so that we keep our sizes small enough to allow that individualized attention that children really do need. Looking at in particular at the qualifications of teachers to teach in the early grades is critical. Sometimes the most well-trained teachers do make better instructors at different levels of the system. Sometimes we need to consider what are the qualifications needed in those early years, because it's a specialized type of instruction. The needs of those learners are very different from grades 1 to 4 than they are in the later primary years. And looking at putting your best teachers in those lower classrooms should be a central role within the system. We know that that's where we capture the children. We know that if they do well in those early grades, they'll do well later on. And that's where we want to put our emphasis and support to get that right in those first 4 years, so that the rest of the years go well. What we see also is that the assignment of teachers to posts may not reflect the full needs of schools, because we found the same average number of teachers across all of the schools where we went. So as we look at distribution of teachers, as we look at assignment and even recruitment, we need to consider what the sizes are of our communities, where our schools have the greatest need, so that we get the right teachers to the right classrooms most of the time. What we also want to consider is what this means backward into our strategies for managing the teachers, not only who are new to the system, but who are already there. And finding ways to ensure teachers are well positioned in the right place and at the right time will be central to making sure we have the number of teachers we need in those places. So one of the goals of this study was to also understand, since 2014, when the last national assessments occurred, how well we've done in kind of gaining. Is this better? Perhaps. Ooh, that's good. I'm not very good at these. So, I was saying that one of the goals of this program was to understand what happened in 2014 when the last national assessment was done, up to 2021, when we did the next assessment. And one of the things we want to keep in mind is that different assessments can target different skills. In addition, different tests can have different levels of difficulty. So as we look to do comparisons across various years and across different tests that are administered, we want to be very careful to ensure that the tests are equitably aligned and that they are testing the same difficulty level of students. One thing we were not able to determine was a match between the two types of assessments that were administered at that time, and whether or not they were exactly aligned in the skills that they were testing and the difficulty level with which students were being assessed. One of the things we know, however, is that you can compare baseline, meaning you can compare absolute zeros, and you can understand in a big way how well children are doing in progressing if you look at whether or not we are reducing the number of non-readers in the system, the number of illiterate students in this example, against those who are reading something. And what we see here is that Sierra Leone, in our recent study in 2021, does fall in the upper half of the countries in the analysis. And this is compared across a range of countries in the continent. We did only look at English literacy because that is the language we use for assessment. That is one of the baselines we do want to have a comparison with, because English language acquisition is often secondary language for most students. And even if it is the national language of the country, it's often not the home language of our learners. It's not their first language they speak in their household. What we see, however, is that Sierra Leone is doing quite well in comparison to other countries in terms of reducing the number of non-readers in schools. And this means that the zero scores that you're demonstrating are far fewer, positively so, in the classrooms. And it's a great thing to build from going forward. And we did see a reduction in the number of non-readers from 2014 to now, which demonstrates we do see progressive development of skills potentially year on year. Why that's happening or how that's happening is something that needs further exploration. But I think it is important to point out that there has been a shift over this time. There has been an improvement, and that's something to build from positively going forward. One of the other things we wanted to do is provide some level of analysis between 2014 and 2021 in these key subtasks for Egra. And what we look at here is a range of subtasks that are starting from the very basics, what I call the bottom-up skills. Do you know the alphabet? Do you know the sounds of the language? Because if you know those individual sounds, it means you're able to apply that to concepts of words. If you understand concepts of words, you can apply that to texts. And what we see is that there is demonstrable improvement between these 2 years and across grades when we see the proportion of learners who are able to do something. And we see a huge reduction in the percentage of learners who are non-readers, going all the way up through those years into learners who are able to read. And in the next slides, we'll see what that looks like. But what's important is the dark blue bar has significantly reduced between 2014 and 21. This is in keeping with the slide before, where we see a big reduction in the number of readers who are unable to do any reading in the classroom. So there's been a positive development across all of the subtasks we would hope to see, and significant improvement also between grade 2 and grade 4, whereas we didn't see that very much in the 2014 study. So these are 2 things to latch onto. Number 1, that we are reducing the number of illiterate students within a classroom, which is where you want to go. You want more children reading more of the time. And we also see a significant improvement in learners' progression as they go from grade to grade, meaning they're doing better as they move to the higher grades. This we didn't see in 2014, and it's a very positive development within the classrooms. So what does this mean in terms of some of the key subtasks? Well, this graph shows us with letter sounds how learners fared in 2014 with the alphabet and the sound knowledge, and how they fared in 2021. And what we see here is that learners in 2021, on the whole, did perform better than their counterparts in 2014. We see this in terms of how many learners are able to recognize at least 1 to 10 letters, or 10 to 20 letters. What we find, though, is that there's a drop-off after about 20 letters in the assessment, meaning that they are getting through some early components of the test, but they're not able to identify those letters with accuracy and speed. So this is something that we would like to think about as we look at curriculum reform, and that the focus on phonics instruction, the sounds of the language, understanding the principles of how those are applied, will be critical to being able to make children read with more fluency and therefore comprehension. But we did see a shift from 2014 to 2021 in a positive way, and also between grades. So this is something to consider as we go forward to build from, and to see how we can continue to bring in appropriate concepts for that bottom-up instruction, and helping teachers know how to teach those skills to learners so that they're able to apply those to the texts. The second graph here is looking at their reading fluency, so how well do they do reading a passage. And what we see here is a similar trend between 2014 and now. But what we see actually is a much better level of improvement. Whereas these, again, I want to caveat, are not fully comparable because the assessments were not valued at the same level and were not analyzed as such. One thing we do try to see is, did they fall into higher level baskets? Did they perform better with the majority of the text they were exposed to? And here you see a much more nuanced progression across those baskets. And what we see is that significantly more learners, especially in grade 2, are reading more words of a text. They're connecting what they're understanding, and they're able to identify those words in passages. What we want to be able to see is further progression on the right side of that graph, that learners are reading more of that text wholly. This tells us, however, that as long as we are reading in just those lower levels of the words we are identifying, it means we won't be able to comprehend those texts. You have to understand 98% of a passage in order to comprehend the majority of what it says. And this means reading all of those words nearly perfectly in order to take that and apply it into meaning. So we do see positivity here, but this is an area that we would also want to focus on through top-down instruction, whole language instruction, and whole language engagement with texts, so that we can get learners more confident in what they're reading, so they can take better meaning from those passages. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victoria. Very interesting and exciting findings. I'm not going to go through those findings. We're going off them. And because of time, I'm going to call, it's a privilege to call on the Minister of Basic and Senior Secondary, my boss. Please. Right, so sorry about that. We first go to Unicef for a response, and after that we'll get the Minister to come.
Thank you. So I'm a bit more formal, so here we go. Honorable Minister, Deputy Minister, key education stakeholders, Montrose International, members of media, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really pleased to join you in this official launch of the early grade reading assessment, early grade mathematics assessment report. And as we heard, there's so much data and very interesting data. So we really look forward to go more in depth and have time to discuss and analyze. I think it contains very vital information on learning outcomes over time, and it has been conducted by Montrose International with the oversight from the Ministry of Basic and Senior Secondary Education, and with support from Unicef and Teaching Service Commission as part of the current Global Partnership for Education program. It's very interesting because the assessment was undertaken against the background of the following global indicators as well, which reflect the current situation of learning around the world, and just give two indicators. 53% of children in low and middle income countries across the world experience learning poverty. That means children cannot read proficiently by age 10. And 1 in 6 children in poor countries, especially in sub-Saharan Africa or low-income countries, fail to have skills in math and language. So this report now gives us much more detailed insight of the actual situation here in Sierra Leone, and it's very, very useful. But it reflects the importance of regularly exploring the status of education and to take a deep dive into understanding the various challenges affecting learning. So we are very proud as Unicef to be supporting the Ministry of Basic and Senior Secondary Education in undertaking this national baseline early grade reading and mathematics assessment. In short, I've been told it's called Egra and Egma. With the study at hand, we now have a bird's eye view on the current state of early grade reading and mathematics skills among children in primary grades across all 16 districts in Sierra Leone. It's worth noting that this assessment aligns with government priorities outlined in the Sierra Leone Midterm National Development Plan and in the Education Sector Plan 2018-2020, and includes the priority to improve literacy and numeracy at primary level, and that it improves important results to help set the desired targets of the country to achieve in education, and this is also linked to sustainable development goals. So, as we heard, a lot of important information is coming out of this assessment. We will have to spend some time absorbing it, discussing it, analyzing it, and then put it into action. And I find, I just want to pick up two of the things you mentioned. Students performed well in number identification and quantities discrimination. And we also found that students' profiles for oral reading fluency indicated that they are progressing as readers from grade 2 to grade 4. And that's actually a very important progress forward compared to the last assessment in 2014. And also the mention of reduced illiteracy. I think development of a country builds on being literate and learning. So this is important. On the other hand, I note that the study highlights a significant difference between the performance of boys and girls, with boys performing better than girls on the majority of tasks. There are several factors that contribute to this, which will be explored to adjust teacher training to address this disparity. I think it's a very important point to take note of and that needs further insight. Unicef therefore looks forward to work closely with the Ministry of Basic and Senior Secondary Education, and especially with the Teaching Service Commission, to develop specific gender-responsive strategies to support the enhancement of learning competencies among both girls and boys. We also look forward to further commitments to support the government to ensure quality, equitable education is accessible to all children in the country, including supporting early childhood development opportunities. And I think this is a very important point too, where we also are working to improve. So for the next steps, the assessment results will be used by the government and key partners to enrich teaching practices and to enhance learners' competencies. On the part of UNICEF, we remain committed to support interventions to strengthen teachers' capacity development. In 2022, we will build upon the ongoing teacher training that we are providing and supporting with an additional 10,649, that's interesting that it's 49, early grade teachers with early grade teacher training. This will mean that approximately 60% of all early grade teachers will have been trained on these methodologies with a focus on child-centered instructional practices in early grade reading and numeracy under the GPE program. And I have to say, I had the privilege of going and looking at some of the trainings in December, and I was very impressed. I think they are going quite well. It was so interesting to see the teachers, how they were absorbing these new methodologies, how they expressed that this is something very useful, the tools, the way it's building up. So I think it's important we continue this work. And the report also emphasizes on the need to enrich resources for trained teachers, which would help improve delivery of reading and numeracy methodologies in the classroom, which I just gave an example of. And then distribution of reading and numeracy student-centered teaching and learning methodologies, including audio content for teachers for self-learning, also helped significantly to improve the availability of teacher resources over the past year. UNICEF is hoping to complement this throughout 2022 with providing solar-powered radios to over 3,500 early grade teachers. Finally, I would like to say we are in this with the government and with the ministry, and we find it exciting because these types of assessments are so important to stake out the new strategy, new ways, keep the good things we are doing, because also I was very pleased to see the assessment shows some really good progress, some really good things are going on in the field. We still have some problems, but we're here together to solve it, and I look forward to continued collaboration with the ministry and everyone in the room. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the response. Definitely the findings of the report will be used by the ministry and also the educational stakeholders. On that note, can I kindly ask the Minister of Basic and Senior Secondary Education to give us a response to this?
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Minister and Chair, Liv, the Deputy Rep for UNICEF, and Victoria representing Montrose, and all of our partners in the room. It's good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'll speak on three things. So one will be on partnerships, the other one will be on the importance of this study and what we're extracting from it, and the third part will be what the future looks like. I don't think you have a copy of the report yet, it's there, but you've seen it. The image represents the feeling that I have today and what Sierra Leone should be feeling as we Egma study, and it is one of hope. It's a young girl with a pencil writing in the book, excited about the future of learning, excited about herself within the classroom where there's some interaction and people moving, and that level, that is what we want to see in our classrooms. We want our classrooms to be like that. We want our children, and in particular our girls, to be as excited and hopeful as this cover. That's what this report represents for us. So today is a really big day. It's also a really important day because when I started as minister, and I suppose for the last 3 years, every time people reference data on early reading or early math, I get angry. I get angry because they reference 2014 data. It's always something like 80% of Australian children got 0 in early reading, early grade reading. That was 2014, and they will do our 2014. But we knew that we weren't there. The data did not represent us, the data did not represent the work that we did, and the data did not leave confidence and inspiration for our children, for our parents, and for the system. So it was really important that we move past the 2014 Egma data, and as of today, I hope nobody ever references that unless in comparison to where we are today, and once we went reading and absorb all of this. This would not have been possible without NBSSE, Unicef, Montrose, GPE, and TSE. These are people who work together anyway. Montrose did the 2014 study, and so there is an understanding of where we have come from as well as the knowing ground. Our relationship with Unicef, I could spend all day talking about, but last year, 1 year, we launched the dictionary app that now has close to 500,000 people who use it. We launched the results checker that has 15 million SMSs that have gone through that system, and 3.3 million, 250,000 people who used it to check their results. And these numbers are ridiculous. They represent what transformation means within the sector. And yesterday we launched the Learning Passport with Unicef as well, and where we're bringing together learning materials to children and parents and classrooms all over the country for free, including examination materials. So in terms of our partnership with Unicef, I know our teams are currently working on the annual work plan, Your Challenge. I hope you use this document as a base with which you implement and design what we're going to do in 2022 and beyond. I sit on the board of GPE, and we have the GPE coordinator here as well. I want to thank the GPE team for everything that they've done. And Sierra Leone as well is one of those countries that have been selected, one of the first, within the first 10 countries that's been selected to benefit from the system transformation grants based on a compact. And those compacts will be developed based on the Egma, based on the education sector analysis and the ESP, which is being led, the development of which is being led under Mrs. Moore at the Ministry of Basic and Secondary Education. These benchmarks are important. We are halfway to the 2030 goals, and the benchmark results from UNESCO Institute of Statistics says that countries are actually not going to meet the SG goal. However, there are going to be phenomenal things that countries have done, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, with challenges around the number of children who will access ECD, early childhood education, and we know that that's a problem in Sierra Leone. And it's important that we develop these benchmarks for GPE speak about the data and how the data is being used. Already, the assessments and the survey and the mapping and sampling that came from this study, which we made sure was large enough that we can compare it across countries and it can be nationally representative. I know it took us a couple of back and forth, but it was important that we did that. Mean that today the World Bank Learning Poverty that was referenced, Global Education Dashboard, is using those same schools. Now, for the first time in this country, we can have not one, not two, but multiple assessments that will be comparable nationally and across time. And that is phenomenal for a country. And in terms of how we use data, how we use data for evidence, decision making, and how we use data to shape policies that will develop. So I do want to observe and let people know that the importance of the sampling that was done behind this data. And the other thing that I wanted to also mention is that this is not just about reading and mathematics. This is about the school, what happens in the school and the observations that happen, the audio, video, interviews, surveys. It's about what happens in the community, what happened in COVID, and it's the breadth and depth with which we're able to understand where our country is now with regards to education. That is really important, not just about reading and numeracy. And so the question really, as Victoria was saying, is what next? What's our role? What's your role as civil society? What's your role as media? What's your role as NBSSE? What's your role as TSC? What's your role as Unicef Education Partners? What's your role as parents? I drop off my 2.5-year-old at nursery every day, and something she enjoys doing is to say, I see letter E, and then she sounds the E. And something she's 2.5, I said. So she goes, C, and then I feel like, it's S. But you know, we're not gonna argue about whether it's S or C. But the idea around phonics and the idea around our expectation for our children was something that really stood out clearly in terms of our engagements as community members. As a parent, I do enjoy ensuring that my 2.5-year-old can play and understand that can be S or C, it doesn't matter. But at least she knows that P is for Pelina and is for her name. And it is something that we can learn from other countries. In my engagements with the Minister of Inspectorate, one of the ministers in the UK, they mainstreamed phonics across all of UK, and people did not like it when he was doing it. But one of the benefits of that has been that whether you're rich or poor, or from the Queen's house, or from the Papa's home, you all know that it's okay, wherever you come from. And when we are able to master these and have expectations for our children, that when they go to class 1 actually, and that was a very sad slide, that we don't expect our children to know ABC in class 1. It is very sad that we expect that class 2, that our children should know the alphabet. And as a government, one of the things we've done is to mainstream ECE. So for the first time, we've made early childhood education a part of our educational system. Our educational system for 6334 starts at age 6, class 1. But we know that so much happens, and so last year we launched the integrated early childhood development policy that includes curriculum material. Again, many of those we did with Unicef, and with regards to the recommendations for reading, we published 5 books, and those books were put on USB sticks and adding it to the radio that we supply why these are little things that we're doing, certainly informed and shaped by the evidence, but which are in line. So what next? Something that was very interesting for me was the radio teaching program. People reference our response to the COVID pandemic, to what we did in Ebola, and the continuation that exists. We set up the radio teaching program during the Ebola period. The radio teaching program stayed functional and open. And when COVID was here, we not just worked with the Teaching Service Commission to train new teachers and get new material. We made sure we engaged community radios all across the country to use the radio teaching program. And often people complain, nobody listens to the radio teaching program, nobody does, I don't get it. But I think about 87% of people who were interviewed actually listened to the radio teaching program in the study. And that's not small. And what this has meant for us as a ministry is now we've decided that we're going to expand the radio teaching program to be national. So we bought 4 new transmitters that are currently being set up across the country to bring the radio teaching program to communities that never had it, because of the impact that we were able to see. In terms of getting learners to read, today's World Read Aloud Day, by the way. So when you go home, you should read aloud to your children, or find some kid on the street and read one paragraph to them. And then we'll be implementing the things, the recommendations there. But some of the things that we've done as a ministry is do what we call the holiday reading series, where we take books, again, books developed by Sierra Leoneans, and some of the books that we've developed with Unicef, distribute it for free on soft copy, create audio versions of those books, leave those books in the library, and engage communities and these children to read and come and read, and we give them prizes. These little things go a long way, and I do want to invite us as stakeholders to ensure and continue challenging our children to read. Why are our children on average 2 years older when they're than their class? Why are our children dropping out in primary school and repeating in class 1? Why is class 1 repetition rates much higher than all the other classes? Why is it only that 53% of our children attend school from those who are enrolled? Where are our children? Where do the parents take them? Does the community know that our children are not going to school? Teachers are in school and they are attending, irrespective of their salary, by the way. What are they teaching? What are they teaching? The government and partners spend lots of money training teachers. Everybody trains teachers. Are we training them with the right set of skills and materials to improve learning outcomes in our classrooms? What's the role of CPSS and NACOT, the Council of Head Teachers, the Teachers Union? How are they absorbing these content and bringing it back to their classrooms? These and many more are questions that we have, and these are many more questions that I ask my teams in the SSE, ESTI, TSC, and pretty much every stakeholder to ask when you read this. I don't know how long Montrose is here, but I think you should go and present this to the well of Parliament. Every parliamentarian should know these things. So Emmanuel, make sure definitely the Basic Education Committee must see this. And if possible, everybody in Parliament should see these slides. It is important. That's important. Whilst this year, within our programs, we're going to do another assessment. We're doing a class 6 level assessment, I think. And you can be obviously like all the other people we're going to be. but the learning assessment units that we are setting up mean, and it's for us as a country to reflect on the impact of the work that is ongoing and whether the resources that we're investing in education is paying dividends. I must say, the reports in that girl's face shows that it's valuable and that there's dividends. And this is why, if you look at countries that have made the biggest jump over the last couple of years in domestic education financing, in learning outcomes now, in teacher training, in Sierra Leone, in terms of policies that we implement. And some of those policies people will fight, like radical inclusion, or like making our examination results free and available for everybody. Systems will fight us for that. Parents will fight us for that. But I think where there's evidence and data as policymakers and leaders, it's our job to make sure that they understand either before or as those policies are being changed, or they understand after we change those policies for them and their children and all of our children anyway. This week has been very hectic for us as a ministry, but this is a major one for us. We just launched the Youth Advisory Group today, and it's the first time that a ministry is saying we want young people to tell us what we should do. And I made that pledge when I was at COP in November, and we've done it today. And I also made that pledge, another pledge today, which is that we will implement the Youth Advisory Group into the Education Act, make it into law. And so, because it's good to make pledges, I challenge my team, and I know Adama is here and should come on the panel maybe when we have the panel meeting. Adama, we are pledging together that we will take these recommendations from this baseline study and we'll put it to the ESP, and we'll use it to prioritize what goes into the ESP. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. Indeed, there is hope for our children in Sierra Leone with the current trend of changes that are taking place in the education sector. We are very pleased.
I think apparently I have to launch the report. So, as Minister of Basic and Senior Secondary Education, and on behalf of the President and the government of Sierra Leone, I'll now launch the Sierra Leone National Early Grade Reading and Mathematics Assessment Baseline Study 2021.
Thank you. On that note, I'm going to go back to the GP coordinator, Emmanuel. That's going to take us through the panel discussions.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Minister. And thank you to Dr. Senge, the Honorable Minister of Basic and Senior Secondary Education, for a fantastic presentation that allowed us the opportunity to familiarize ourselves with the findings which will serve as a baseline that will inform government policies and improve on outcomes in this country. Thank you to Lee as well, and thank you to Ms. Victoria. At this point, we will follow the conversation with a panel discussion. And the panelists, I would use a few minutes to introduce them very briefly. And we would have Leave and Deputy Minister step down for a minute, and then we'll call the panelists to come up in a minute. We'll just allow them a few minutes. I think, no, I think there's a substitution. Yes. So thank you once again, everyone, for being here and gracing this occasion. We would spend a few minutes here discussing a few questions regarding the studies that have been published. On the panel, we have the Honorable Minister, Dr. David Moyo-Nasenge. Again, these are all distinguished stakeholders in education. The technical group that actually conducted the studies, Montrose, representing them is Ms. Victoria Brown, and representing Unicef is Ms. Eve. I'm not going to try to pronounce her last name. And then finally, last but not the least, Dr. Saki Conrad, representing TSC. We have one question for each of them, and I will go through the questions, and they will respond to the questions. And after that, we would entertain some questions from the audience, and I'm sure there might be opportunity for interactions. So without much delay, my first question would go to Ms. Victoria of Montrose, who is the Curriculum and Evaluation Consultant for Montrose. So based on the findings of the studies, what, in your view, are the priority areas the ministry should immediately and in the medium and long run focus on? What are some processes you would recommend, and who are the stakeholders you see as key players in these processes?
Thank you. First of all, I think what's critical to reflect on here, and thinking from what the minister said, is that going forward from here, progress has to do with the learning communities that get established in this country. The learning communities have to do with the folks that are responsible for children's education, well-being, and school access and completion throughout their cycle of basic education. This includes parents and communities. It includes teachers and schools. It includes the instructors responsible for teachers' growth. It includes the government at the lower and upper levels of the system who are responsible for not only defining policy, but implementing it. And that has to do also with the civil society and the stakeholders more broadly in the system that are going to support those practices to get into every classroom, into every school in the country. So the focus on the learning communities for children and all the levels of that system are central to going forward, because this is something we all have to do together. And it is something that has a role to be played by every person in that system, including the learner themselves. And when we think about this, I think it's important to look at three things. The people in the system, who's there, where are they, what they should do, how they should do it, and why it's important. In keeping with those people, we have to look at the process. What do they need to know? How do they need to know it? How should that grow over time? What does progression look like? And what are the processes involved in making that happen? And the other thing to consider is the product. And we can look at that in two ways. Product is not only what we get out of it, a competent, educated learner, able to participate in society and able to contribute to the growth of the country, but also the product is what we put in. It's what we give to students in terms of the resources they have. That's their schools, that's their trained teachers, that's the materials they need to get access to the education they deserve. So people, process, and product. All of these things are critical to making big gains, and they have to move together. And we must be clear about what that looks like here, why it looks that way, and also how those needs differ around the country, because the needs of the North may be different than the South. The needs of the urban children may be different than the rural. And so as we look to the people, process, and product, it needs to be nuanced. It needs to be contextualized. And it needs to make sense for the people that are engaging in that system. One of the things to think about as well is how we decentralize our messaging. We're here today on a national launch. How do we get these messages down to teachers, to schools, to parents? If we create a learning community, if we create a practice around what we do, that means that everybody has to understand the role they play. They have to share the same goals. They have to be able in some way to speak the same language. They have to know this is what success looks like. And this is how we know we're on track. So in this sense, we need to look across broadly in the system. We need to bring everyone to the table. We need to have a buffet-style approach rather than individualized plating, because we have to share together and we have to learn together if we're going to make a change. That leads to another big point, which is to look at developmental change. It's incredibly important to have high targets, to have goals, to have milestones we want to achieve. And those must be aspirational. But they also have to be practical. And a way to think about that is that we have to work with the system we have today, not the system that we want. If we want to make a change, we have to start from where we are. We can't get to that end of the journey unless we're sure of the destination. And the only way we can track that progress is by knowing where we are on the map. So I think one of the big things to think about here is, what should our targets look like? How should they change over time as we look to better inputs in the system, to strengthen it, to grow a foundation, to make sure that we have the right stability in order to see more progressive change. But what that means is our targets today will look different than our targets tomorrow. But they should, because we have to start from somewhere. And most importantly, we need to start from where we are. That means we need to understand more of the lived experience of teachers, of communities, of students. What are their successes, their opportunities, and what are their challenges? We're not quite done with access, but we have to move that along with quality. And one thing we need to think about here is, how do we start from the reality on the ground? How do we take this information and use it to build a really great structure for change? And a short way of saying it, work with the system that you have, not the system that you desire. And if you do that well, the system you desire will come into play, and then your goals can improve, they can shift. And when we think about that, realistic targets, clear goals, developmental milestones, these are things that are central to getting everyone on board in your system, to get them talking the same language, and to get them deciding what change looks like here, what it looks like today, so we can figure out what it should look like tomorrow. One way of thinking about that is, what kind of benchmarks do we want to see? What are our targets? Now that we know what children are doing, what should we do to map that backward to see what they should be gaining year on year? And benchmarks are not just for kids, they're also for teachers. They're also for the instructors of those teachers. As we devolve the curriculum for children, we need to think explicitly about the curriculum for teachers and about for the trainers of those teachers. It's not enough just to get children able to read better. We need to support our teachers to have the confidence to do it themselves, to be able to have ownership of the language they're instructing, to know how that language is constructed, how it's designed, how it's applied. Giving them the base of that knowledge will give them confidence to teach better and give them confidence to improve skills at a faster rate. So as we think about what we're doing for kids, it has to move in tandem with what we're doing for teachers and what we're doing for those mentors who support them. Competency frameworks are key to this, and there should be targets set alongside those for learners, for those for teachers. And as we think about progression, we need to think about what I call moving the middle. How do we get more children reading more of the time? How do we get more teachers teaching better more of the time? And how do we look at grouping them into categories that allows us to see where shifts are happening or where they're stalling? How do we get a reduction in those non-readers so that we have more readers that are developmentally progressing in that system? And that they're able to have confidence that they're achieving targets year on year, grade on grade. As we said before, the age of 10 is pivotal. That's grade 4. What we know from research is that if a child is not reading by that age, they're going to face problems progressing in the system. In some sense, their foundational capabilities are rather fixed by that age, and gaining additional skills after that can be a challenge. So this is a clear cutoff point for governments to think about. What happens between grade 1 and grade 4? How do we get children where they need to be by the age of 10 so that they're able to progress through the system and achieve all of the things that we want them to? As we look backward to where we want them to be, we have to align it with where they are. And we need to ensure that our curriculum, our instruction, our support, our training reaches all those levels of the system. That the inputs we provide are centrally connected to the outcomes we desire. And that empowerment has to happen from two ways, bottom up and top down. The same way we teach children to read. You have to know the small things if you're going to do the big things. And I think one of the key here is that you have layers of support everywhere you go. Learning can happen anywhere. A classroom is a place where you gather together to gain new knowledge. And a teacher is someone who gives you information or knowledge you don't have. Teachers can be everywhere. Classrooms can be anywhere. And as we look to grow the basic support of the work you're doing, we need to consider the role that everybody plays and the role that they can contribute into growing skills for the kids. And I think that you have a great foundation to begin from. You're asking all the right questions. Now we must come together and figure out the answers that we can collectively rally around, and that we can be very clear on the right targets and the right way forward. And I want to commend the government and commend the stakeholders in the room for being committed to this and to being excited about the journey ahead. It will be challenging, but we should always do the hard things. That's why we're here. And the next years ahead will, I think, prove a lot about how we take our knowledge and put it into practice. And we continue to apply assessment and information and evidence to the decisions we make. Egra has a great role to play. It can be a litmus test. It can be a flyover perspective of how we're doing in that progress. But helping take that assessment down to classrooms, helping teachers understand capabilities, helping them apply those skills in time. This will allow assessment to become realized in the classroom every day. And we need to ensure that teachers are able to do this well, and that they can take the same skills and use those every day. Whereas our government will continue to look at that macro level perspective, we need the micro too. So we need to be top down and bottom up as we move forward. And that's where the change really happens, somewhere in the middle. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brown. I suppose in any other community you would wonder whether the minister will be able to absorb all of that information, but the NDSSE can boast of, and I say this very humbly, engineers who can actually absorb all of that and actualize them and put them into practice and develop apps as well. So our next question goes to Dr. Saki, the chair of the TSC. I think all of us here would agree that teachers are significant variables in impacting outcome or learning outcomes. So who better to speak to perhaps the role that teachers may have to play? And here's my question for you, Dr. Conrad. Now that we understand that teachers have a critical role to play in the entire process of assessment, I would like to ask you, Dr. Saki, chair of TSC, how will teachers be informed and supported to apply these findings?
Okay, first of all, I would like to start by just making a statement about the report itself. I think what the report points to is the fact that there is a wind of change taking place in the education sector in this country. I think most of the other speakers have spoken to that fact. And the report points or highlights some of the green shoots that we are seeing for that change. But that should obviously not make us complacent. It means that we still have quite a lot of work to do. And part of that, as you call it, the learning community lies at the heart of it are the teachers. Before I go on to also answer that question, I just also wanted to just highlight a couple of things, which I think is actually important. If we go back to what is actually taking place in the system now, you should not be surprised that we've seen some improvements in the system. So, for example, let me just highlight a couple of things, and I think some of them have already been highlighted by the previous speaker. Firstly, that last year we trained over 7,000 teachers, P1 to P3 teachers in teaching numeracy and literacy in our schools. This year, the plan is to increase it to 10,000. Also last year, what we've also seen is we've been piloting the training of teachers to teach at the right level. So I know you spoke to the issue of differentiation, and I think we are going to use that to our teachers as well. So I think it's important. Also, let me also just mention the fact that Unicef, through our collaboration with Unicef, we invested quite a lot in early childhood development, which also has an impact on some of what's happening in the system. And lastly, I don't want to go on and on about these things, but also there is the mention of the radio teaching program, and apart from the fact that it has been used as a crisis tool, it can also be a platform that we can use to make some of the improvements that we want. I just wanted to set that context so you can start to see what is actually happening. In terms of informing our teachers, I think we need to do this in 2 ways, or we are going to do this in 2 ways. Firstly, some of the lessons that we got from this report, we need to embed in the pre-service training of our teachers. So we have to collaborate with the Ministry of Technical and Higher Education, our sister ministry, and also with the teacher training institutions. And so in that sense, we will target the potential teachers who are coming into the system, or student teachers as I would like to call them. And they need to know what the lessons that we've got from this message, because they are, if you like, the value chain that will lead us to make the progress. The second point is we need to go back to the teachers who are in the system. Currently, we have offices in all 16 districts in the country, and no doubt this message will be cascaded to district directors, and they will engage district stakeholders and will share this message with them. Incidentally, I was with them at Egma just yesterday, and one of the things that I spoke to them about was some of the findings from Egma, and the need for them to read the report, and I will follow that up with other conversations. We work also very closely with the Sierra Leone Teachers Union. Their secretary is a member of the commission, but we work very closely with them. We consult them on quite a lot of our activities. So no doubt, one of the things I'll be doing is to engage them again. And as you know, a subset of the Sierra Leone Teachers Union is or are the National Council for Head Teachers, and it also has the Conference of Principals. So they would be engaged in that process so that this message can also be cascaded. I also think that what we also have to do, apart from using those channels, in the training of teachers through our in-service training, we need to embed some of the findings of this and some of the good practices and some of the things that we need to address in our in-service training. Quite a lot of things that are happening at the moment, quite a lot of things. But let me just mention a couple of them. We have a project funded by the World Bank which will look at a high-level consultation on CPD, continuous professional development. And what we want to do is to be very strategic in terms of the way we govern and monitor CPD in this country. Currently, as it is done in a haphazard way, it's ad hoc, and And so that conversation will be had, and we will then make sure that numeracy and literacy forms an integral part of that package. And so that is something that is up for the taking. One of the other things that we've been working on very closely in the Commission is not only for us to train teachers face-to-face in groups, but also once the training has been completed, we are now setting up coaches and mentoring systems within schools. So we need to target those mentors and those coaches so that some of this message will be cascaded back to teachers in the classroom. And they will be given the structured support to be able to ensure that they are supported in implementing some of the findings of this. I think one of the other things that I just wanted to go back and just mention is the fact that when we cascade the information to teachers, one of the key points that I also want to make sure that we cover is not only the question of differentiation, but actually pinpointing that in terms of inclusion. Because I think one of the things that we haven't mentioned is the fact that all learners have diverse needs, and those needs need to be addressed, and teachers must be trained to be able to do that. And I think that's a critical point that I would just want to just reinforce. I think at this point I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saki, for that informed conversation regarding how teachers would be informed on the findings of these studies. The next question goes to Leave, representing Unicef. Now, Unicef is a reliable, strong, and tested global and national partner in education, and has been engaged in performance assessments in significant ways across the globe. You equally played a pivotal role in the study under review today. Do you, as an organization, plan to continue contributing in strengthening performance assessments in Sierra Leone? If yes, how?
So I guess you can guess my answer. It's a yes. And yes, we are very interested in continuing supporting this. We believe it's extremely important because we need data. We need data to show what is the actual situation. Data is used for policy making. Data is used to measure, as we talked through the different presentations here, to see how well are teachers doing, how well are schools doing, but most importantly, how well are the students doing, and are they learning something, and what is that something they are learning, and how can they apply it. So it's very important. We've been supporting the establishment of the Learning Assessment Unit in the ministry. It's important to have it in a specific place with people who are trained and who can lead on this. And we will continue to support, together with World Bank, FCVO, and I'm sure there are other partnerships, to strengthen and build the capacity of the Learning Assessment Unit itself, because it depends on the strength and the capacity of this unit, how successful it will be carried out throughout the country in terms of when we do the assessments. Globally, we know that if you do large-scale assessments, if you do the assessments in countries, when you can see trends, when you can show the real data, it will influence the policy making, and it will help to go in the right direction. So educational policy experts, researchers, policymakers, educators, they all confirm that these assessments, such as Egra and Egma, are useful tools, and they legitimize education reforms. And that's why we want to contribute to this. Of course, also we need to measure how well we're going towards the Sustainable Development Goals, specifically Goal 4. We are on a good way to it. But if we don't figure out what is working really well, what is working so-so, and what is not working, we will not have a complete progress. So this is very important too. And the assessments help us to see this. Of course, sometimes, as was mentioned by myself earlier, there was a difference measured between girls and boys in how much they learn. The numbers don't always tell the full story, so we're not only talking about numerical assessments that we know percentage or actual numbers. We sometimes, these actual numbers or percentages is what gives us the way forward to what we really need to analyze, also qualitative, from a qualitative perspective, to really understand what's going on and to be able to make a change. And I would make a rough guess that, for example, when it comes to why are there different learning outcomes for girls and boys, it's not only related to education. I think it's related to gender inequalities in the society as a whole. And it's interesting because education can help working to reduce these inequalities. And it could be useful for other sectors too, so very important. Again, your question was around the assessments, why we want to support them. Of course, we believe that Egra and Egma are really strong tools for quality implementation, monitoring, evaluation of the implementation, and especially now we're focusing on the early grade literacy and numeracy programs. We're also committed to continue to join hands with the ministry to utilize the assessment data to inform policy making, the implementation, and to get better results. So, going forward, we believe that assessments are a crucial tool to be able to make good policies, to be able to do good implementation, to be able to also stake out issues or parts that need to be improved. And this is now ongoing under the Global Partnership for Education, which I should highlight. It's extremely important. It also gives us access to know what's going on in other countries, what are good experiences, and what we can tap into. And now with this new data from these assessments, we're even able to ask better questions, more specific questions that will help us to lead the way within Sierra Leone. But I also believe we should aim at being a leading country where we can show others that are struggling with education how it should be done, and it's possible to be done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dave. I'm pretty sure most of us cannot overstate how relevant and useful and invaluable the partnership with Unicef has been as far as educational development in this country. So thank you once again. Our final question is for the Honorable Minister. Sir, please share your thoughts on how the findings of the study will be used to support and inform best practices in early grade literacy and numeracy in Sierra Leone.
I don't know how you want to answer the question. I mean, I think it will be the first part is putting in the ESPs. I think our ESP is informed by the detailed education sector analysis. It's informed, it will be, the team has read elements of this, and these are already being incorporated. I think when you heard the TSC chair, because we had seen different drafts of this before, I know you're always seeing it today, but we've seen it earlier. That's informed the kinds of trainings that TSC is doing, the P1 to P3 training that with Unicef and with TSC and others. So we are already incorporating elements of this, but I think what we are going to do is to, as mentioned, look at benchmarks, the global benchmarks. they're clear. One of those that the world is not doing well is on ECD, the world of Sub-Saharan Africa. We are making commitments through GPE and through other programs to invest in ECD. If you look at the breakdown of, I was looking at the costing for the ESP, ECD receives very little money, and it's not just in Sierra Leone, it's globally. It doesn't make, the world needs, the earth needs to shake a little and all of that great shake and reset, because we're just like robots. We do the same things that we've been doing for generations, and we expect it to be different. And in this case, we invest the most in higher and technical tertiary institution education. Then we invest a little bit in, if you look at the education sector financing budget, most goes to higher and tertiary, and then teacher salaries, and then secondary schools, and then primary schools, and a tiny amount goes to ECD. And yet, we know by research that if you don't address the ECD, the cognitive neural frameworks, architecture is set, by the time you're in P4, then all of that other money is just waste of money. And we know those things by evidence, and yet our actions don't necessarily reflect what we do or what the evidence is. So we will begin to streamline those in law and in policy. If you saw the recommendations of the Constitutional Review Committee, for the first time we're making sure that secondary education is not a right, and maybe we'll push the boundary a little bit in the Education Act and make ECD in 1 year, which it is already in the FQSC, but now the Act will put ECD 1 year a right that children have access to, so that when our children go to class 1, we should at least expect that they do the ECD class 1, not when they're in class 2. So I think the ESP is the primary one. We are developing the Education Act, so we invite our partners and stakeholders this quarter, this Q1. We should have the Education Policy and Act to join us in taking these recommendations and holding us accountable to it. And definitely, as Lee said, that Sierra Leone should be an example. President Bio often talks about Sierra Leone, wanting Sierra Leone to be again Athens of West Africa, and I used to, and I told him this, I used to tell him like, well, why Athens? Why are you still trying to have us also Athens of West Africa? You know, we should be, Namibia should be saying they want to be the Sierra Leone of the Southern Africa. They want to be the Freetown of Europe. And he said, no, it's not that. It's that I want us to go back to the top. It's about being African and it's about, so we will still be in Denmark and in Norway. They should still be saying, you know, we want to be the Sierra Leone of Scandinavia in terms of how rapidly we grow and change these numbers, in terms of radical inclusion, in terms of ECD, in terms of digitization and how we provide those things. And I believe that. And like I said, the girl is challenging us all to look ahead and be hopeful, and we will be a key example of how we make leaps in achieving SDG 4 targets and global benchmarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. And as I promised earlier, whenever he speaks, he lights up a light bulb. It just occurred to me that, and I'm sure to most of us, that we never really gave much thought to the fact that more resources are spent trying to build the top floor of a 20-story building than building the foundation. I think that's important to note. I'm going to allow the Honorable Deputy Minister to deliver the closing remarks, but before I do that, I have to say thank you to everyone for being here, and thank you to all the panelists and the tremendous partnership with Unicef and TSC and Montrose. And everyone here today, including civil society, media, the youth. Thank you.
Sorry. You invite partners. Focus 1,000 is here.
And we're going to let the Deputy Minister acknowledge and recognize it.
You want to hear from our side?
Oh, sorry. I think I actually skipped a step. I apologize. I actually skipped a step. We were supposed to allow few questions from the audience. Again, we have another smart man around. Who just reminded us that. Okay, questions, please.
Sorry, I will stand and do this for Focus 1,000. We are part of the GE, and I want to thank Montrose and Unicef for piloting this. First of all, I worked for Unicef for 14 years in this country. Measuring learning achievement has always been part of their intention, particularly in Australia. Now they have segregated it into early grade reading and early grade mathematics assessments, which is good. Probably we don't need to forget to it in terms of the assessment. I know in the first 4 years of the development of the child, mathematics is best learned, and it is said from the homes. And mathematics is all about from colors, from structures, everything we do in mathematics in terms of putting ideas together. Even though in our schools, the teachers thought mathematics was difficult. But whatever we do in talking about markets, change, and all that, so these are all the things that we can actually implement in mathematics. So that apart from just the practical, the abstracts can come probably in grades 4, 5, 6. But I want to propose to the ministry that these two subjects, literacy as well as numeracy, be the most important in the first years of learning, probably even more than 50%. I know my father-in-law used to talk about mathematics. If you start reading and doing numeracy in classes 1 to 3, all these other things will come like as a play. Talking about NTSC, if the child doesn't understand even the way the questions have been asked, whether in English or mathematics, they will not pass. Now I want to also go to the ladies, girls. We know that the first years, the girls have greater ability in languages than boys. When it comes to mathematics, there is no gender difference here. So again, we want to think about that. Both boys and girls learn the same level of mathematics in terms of the cognitive development of the person. So why are the girls performing very well in NPSC? Because of that difference of their acquisition of language in the first years and all that. So let's make sure that at least there is a decrease by exposing those students in classes 1, 2, and 3, and make sure that don't bring any other subjects rather than English language and mathematics. And in terms of Unicef, to support the ministry, if they have now tried to talk about early childhood development, that should be one of the major support areas. As far as Uncle Namaya was in the education sector, we never talked about the DCD. We were only trying to talk about it. You understand? So if it is a place from year 3 to year 5, these are the places where the child is going to learn English and mathematics, and call them mathematics, arithmetic, call them all right. But it's actually putting those things together as ideas. That's what mathematics is all about. So that will help. So that the ministry with its plan, strategic plan they're talking about, they try to look at the team. The first 3 years, major part of their learning is going to be English or reading, as the case may be, and mathematics. So that you can bring all that social studies here and there, but again, make the use of reading and mathematics. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for that contribution. Does anyone of the panelists want to respond to that? Okay. Does anyone else have a comment or question?
Thank you very much. Thanks to Victoria for that presentation. And of course, as the panelists have discussed, the findings are glaring to everyone. We all know where our problems are. And we know now that we cannot use 2014 anymore to actually do what is happening at that early grade learning in terms of Egra and Egma. I just want to lay the affairs of everyone here that we have seen this as critical to our educational transformation. So that's why when we are developing the education sector plan, as the minister has said, we have put premium on assessment. You know, it cannot be at the magnitude of Montrose, but we also derive some tools from what they have done, so that at whatever level, as the minister said, if you look at the general administration budget for the ESP costing, over 30% is on assessment. Assessment at all levels. Assessment at all levels. Need for assessment. And we also, as a government, as a country, thank you, Honorable Copy, because this was evidence that we should produce an assessment or read this report and digest it and try to come up with policies and programs that are education. Because we say it's 3 years of pre-primary education.
Thank you very much, Madam Adama. I think I'll hand the mic over to the minister or any of the panelists.
Okay. I just want to comment on the ECD, because I think we all around the world, we have learned, especially in the past, maybe in Europe, it's like last 30 years, we learned that ECD is important. But then across the world, in different time zones or time spans, we're learning more and more about ECD. I think the point is very valuable. It is important. I think we've already started some important work here. We're taking some steps forward, also not only Unicef and the ministry, but other important partners in the country, NGOs, other development partners, where we are focusing on ECD and the need to really expand so that every child in this country can have a chance to go to pre-primary. And I think step by step, so maybe it's a good idea to make sure that at least every child has 1 year pre-primary, because then we can lay the ground, some basics, so that when they come to first grade, it's hard for a child, if you've never been in a school before, to even sit still. I'm quite sure the teachers in first grade spend a lot of time getting the children's attention, getting them to sit still, getting them to follow what is going on. And usually the classrooms here, what I've seen is they're big groups, and Montrose and Victoria, you mentioned, big groups are harder to manage, especially at the younger ages, in terms of being able to pay attention to the individual student, which you mentioned again that the teachers should be able to. Myself, I happen to be a teacher, not for the lower grades, certified for higher grades, but I worked as a teacher assistant 1 year in the kindergarten, and I worked with the 5 to 6 years old, so preparing for school. And I can tell you, in the beginning of the year with these kids, we spent a lot of time sitting down, all listening to the one person speaking. This happens in other meetings too, I have to admit, with adults, but we are learning. But there's, the preschool can really address some of these basic issues, so that the teacher, when he or she gets their group in first grade, really can focus more on the quality learning rather than behavioral aspects or trying to explain to a child what it means to be in school all day. So I think the point made by you was from Focus 1000, I think is a really important point. We take note of it, and it is our intention to continue to work together on this as long as the industry join them. Thank you.
I don't think you have a choice. You will be there. I mean, I do thank you, Alama, for allaying all of our fears and for giving us the confidence and that this is already being incorporated into our work. I think, you know, when I was meeting with my colleague in the UK, Minister Gibb, they had already prepared my mind. They said, you know, he's an old man, he's very traditional, he does not like people who are talking about hands-on learning and creativity. So I went in there feeling a little bit like, and I think he had also read up on me that I'm all about play, babies, hands-on learning, critical thinking. So we both came very tense. But it turned out to be a really excellent conversation where I do believe that learning in the early grade should be play-based, which is why our current programs, we do have a lot of play-based work that we're doing. And the reason why it has to be play-based and hands-on learning is we can do math and addition in a million ways. We can learn it, how they teach you with number, with bases, zeros, ones, and tens. You can count with sticks, you can count with stones, you can count with pebbles, you can count with any object and do those things with all those objects. And so there's no one way of learning, which is why in our framework we have what we call the 5 C's. Critical thinking, being able to ask the right set of questions, being able to understand the context that you're in. Civics, that you're learning about change and your role in the market, your role at home, your contribution, to move the blue plates, go and wash the 3 spoons, go and serve in your church, go and clean your streets. The second part is around creativity, or the third part, creativity, that we have to use new ways of teaching. If you don't have a TLM, if you don't have teaching of learning materials, but you have sticks in your compound, you can still teach without, you don't have to have fancy wooden blocks designed in India and paid for by Unicef to come to Sierra Leone to teach counting. You don't have to teach shapes only with those fancy things, and you meet teachers who are like, oh, we don't have they've not supplied us the shapes and colors yet. For all the children in class are wearing a different colored shirt. And so not just one thing about creativity is not just about the children, it's about how we learn as well. Comprehension, I think, reading to understand. The reason why we do numeracy literacy is not just read. I can read and don't know how to apply and understand what I'm reading. So it's comprehension, understanding the context. There was one very interesting finding in the report was around how children understood more when they listened than when they read. And I thought I did ask questions, whether I asked about storytelling culture, whether it's just how our people are. These are things that drive comprehension and what leads to that. And the final one is compositional thinking. We are doing numeracy, not because of numeracy, not because 6 times 6 is 36 and I need to know that and memorize that, but that I can use this to approximate, and I can use this to make estimates, and I can use this to plan better if you're a chief or if you're somebody who's going to grow and make an estimate of how much rice you need to plant in your farm. You need to think competition. Otherwise, you spend 10 hours counting one foot after your foot and making sure that halfway a chicken comes and flies and he forgets and you start again. Before you know, it's 2 hours measuring the field that you could have taken 3 minutes to estimate. So these 5 C's are embedded in our curriculum and our curriculum frameworks. So we do have a curriculum framework for ECD, for early childhood education. We have a curriculum framework for basic education, primary and junior secondary school. And we now have a curriculum framework for senior secondary education. And we also have a civics education curriculum framework. And these have all been developed in the last 2 years, 3 years. The ECD one we points are all linked, and I do believe that we all have a role to play as stakeholders to ensure that our children can play and learn and arrive in class 1 ready to learn and not knowing how to share or just crying and being disruptive. It's okay that I cry, but you know. So thank you very much, and I am very excited about the future of the education in Sierra Leone. Madam Deputy, over to you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. I'll continue to thank you, Dr. Leone, for your astute leadership and vision. This is aligned with the leadership of a new direction, who in their wisdom chose education as a flagship. By extension, we want to thank President Bill for believing in investing in human capital development. Thank you, Unicef, for your continued collaboration and support to the ministry. One of such support has today produced the Egra and Egma baseline study. To Victoria Brown and the Montrose team, we appreciate the time and investment you have taken into undertaking the study, the presentation, and the findings and recommendations will be fully taken on board. To Emmanuel and the GPD team, thank you for leading this task and upgrading our Egma and Egra since 2014. To TSC Chair and his team, the rest of the delivery team, and the entire NDSSC staff, thank you all for supporting this process, and hopefully the results, findings, and recommendations will be used in our planning, trainings, and deliveries. To all our partners and distinguished guests, thank you all for coming. Your contributions are very valued, and they will all be taken on board and useful in our planning and delivery. At this point, we have come to the close of today's pilot launching. I wish everyone a very pleasant day back to our offices and enjoy the rest of what is left of the day. Lunch is being served as well. Thank you all for coming.